The information flow is endless, and with so many sensational headlines, changing policies, and market fluctuations, it can be tough to keep up with what's most relevant to you as a real estate investor. In Boardroom Brief, we endeavor to discuss and provide our point of view and insights on relevant topics that matter to Gradebrook, our investors, and the broader real estate community. Our goal is to provide you with expert opinions in 20 minutes or less. Join us for our first episode with Brandon Corombine and CEO Sasha ציוציוז.
Sasha, thanks for joining us today for the conversation.
Oh, my pleasure.
Perfect. One of the most common conversations we've had in the boardroom over the last year, common question we get from clients and something we continue to see in the headlines in the news cycle is the condo market in the GTA. Some of the recent reports have come out. We have record level pre-construction units for sale, growing inventory on the resale market, the lowest first half sales in pre-construction condos in 27 years and half one 2024. Can you just give us a little bit of color of what's happening in the condo market and what's led us here?
Yeah, I think from our vantage point, whenever we look at sort of a change in what expectations we have in a market, we have to think about what the catalysts of that change are. That's question number one. And then number two is whether a catalyst has led to a systemic change in the market and the way it functions, or whether we're dealing with a point in time, good or bad. So if you think about where we are today, I think we can clearly point to interest rate and the affordability challenges that represents as the single largest determinant of why the pre-construction condo market is as anemic as it is. So then question number two is this our expectation going forward? And I think for us, it's a very clear no, not only to us, but I think, general economic consensus is that once inflation's been tapered, we'll see a cycling down of interest rates and sort of unwinding the tight monetary policy that we've seen. And that then leads us to the question of, well, what do we have left over? And what we have left over is an extremely fundamentally strong market where the demand for housing far outstrips its supply. And that's not something that we see as being disrupted. Just to point out, for example, on what happened during the pandemic, because I think, to your question of what has led us here, going back to 2020 and when interest rates dropped to zero, and what impact that had on the housing market, because it was the reciprocal of what we see today, where it increased affordability and increased accessibility. And as a result of that, we saw a major spike and spiral upward in both velocity and pricing. But again, even back then, the fundamentals were the same. It was a point in time and what that singular driver was. So today we're looking at just the sort of opposite scenario in my mind, and neither of them are permanent. So we believe that since there's been no change to the fundamental picture, where again, this housing scarcity that we have is going to lead to a healthy, sustainable market, both for pre-construction condo and otherwise. But we just have to wait for the conditions of today to change, and that being interest rate most primarily. So for us, we haven't really seen a difference in the way our market's going to function. We have every level of confidence that it will return over time, and we know what factors need to change for it to return. So it's a bit of a waiting game in the interim, but we've been given signals by the Bank of Canada and frankly every other central bank in the world that what they were doing with their monetary policy tightening was very deliberate to deal with an issue, that being inflation. And they've given us every indication that they're going to start trending that downward back to sort of neutral or normal levels, where we can expect to see a normally functioning condo market as we've seen for 20 years in the past.
That's great. And when we look at, getting back to a normal market, we're sitting on record level of inventory. Is this something that, again, we expect to come out of and see that crazy demand come back, or is this going to be a normalized market or take some time to get through the inventory that's built up over the last few years?
Well, every time myself or anybody tries to forecast specific parameters, you're generally always going to be wrong. the approach we take here is to kind of reassess everything at 6-month intervals. Part of being able to react as an investor is being prepared to react and looking at your assumptions and looking at the state of the market regularly. So, we're hesitant to forecast a time frame as much as we are on top of everything that's happening in the market and assessing it continuously. Having said that, I would say that the conditions precedent, that being, slow sales for a period of time, projects that have kind of sat on the sidelines for a period of time, and generally a retreat of pre-construction buyers, will probably take a little bit of time to work itself through. I don't expect, nor do I frankly want, a euphoric market like the one we saw in 2020 to maybe the first half of 2022, because it always leads to a hangover, and we're experiencing that today. I think what we look for is long-term sustainability, and we're blessed to have a fundamentally strong market. I say that word over and over again, but really not every market is like the market in the Greater Toronto area and Greater Golden Horseshoe area, where you have this fundamental imbalance of housing that leads to these strong fundamentals. So what we look for is a return to the market that is a lot more sustainable and long-winded, rather than a volatility that comes with the euphoria and the hangover, So my prediction would be that it'll take a little while to work itself through. And I don't really expect there to be a huge feeding frenzy as much as a much more sustainable tailwind.
Fantastic. And, one of the interesting things to watch has been the prices on the pre-construction side. They've remained relatively stable. We haven't seen a large drop, even with this growing inventory. Can you touch a little bit on what's driving that price to stay where it is when we don't see the demand to match it?
Right. So Business 101 would suggest that, if you can profitably deliver something at a lower price, and that's where the market is and the demand is, as you've said, you would simply drop your price and deliver at that lower price, and everybody wins. You're not seeing that in the pre-construction market, because there's a reality to the cost of delivery. Land costs, all of our hard costs, and other resources required to be able to build condominiums, in addition to, development charges and other soft costs that are associated with it. That cost buildup is a reality that the market has to deal with. And right now, developers are having trouble delivering profitably with a sufficient profit margin at lower prices, right? So that's why you haven't seen the decline in pricing to help spur velocity. You've seen kind of developers more or less holding the line. It's not coming from a position of greed and wanting to take every last dollar off the table. It's coming from the commercial realities of development as they are today. But one thing that we always highlight is that we, as developers or investors in development, are in a margin-based business. We're in a production business. So while we all want to see future appreciation in the price of inventory, we're not dependent solely on that. And I say that because if, for example, a Canadian has spent their last marginal dollar on housing and it can't go a dollar further, then today's economic realities prohibit the production of such housing. And that eventually will start to impact the supply side, and it'll start to impact those input costs, right? So everything that's not being sold today isn't being built, yet we still have an insatiable demand and a need. So that presents a problem. And if price is the lever that has hit its absolute cap, then you're going to start seeing the cost of some of those inputs come down. And for people like us, that's something that we're very cognizant of, is the fact that we make our money and our return for investors based on the margin that's available to us. And that can come by way of price increase. It can come by way of costs alleviating and starting to make their way downward, or a combination of the two. And what allows us to effectively take advantage of those conditions whenever they come to be is the way we structure our investments. Because at the end of the day, we focus on, when we acquire sites, to be as responsible as we can with the leverage that we use. And that gives us the staying power. So it's a function of the acquisition and the structure of our vehicles that allow us to be patient and wait for those conditions to return to the market. So we're not forced to sell at lower prices. We're not forced to go even in inopportune conditions, just because of our leverage profile or because of the structure of our investments. And that's something that is a very protective thing for investors that we've always focused on.
That's great. And there's a great point that kind of leads into one of the most common questions I get right now. How many sites are coming to market in distressed positions? How are developers able to hold sites and wait through this? So is this something that we're seeing more and more of, distressed sites? Is it something we're going to see an increase in going forward? And I guess kind of part two of that is that marketplace still something that Greybrooke's looking to invest in?
I'll start with part two as my part one. I would say that we're always looking for unique opportunities and ways that we can create value. So in some cases that might be looking at, distressed situations when they come to be. I think for us, they generally have a little more complexity than we would like. It's not to say that we won't find those type of opportunities, and we certainly give them the time of day. But it wouldn't be a focus for us. Our focus continues to be the same as it's been, which is identifying prime sites that have sort of a planning window. And I think that part is a little more conducive today. Like, we're not necessarily looking for sites that are absolutely ready to go and paying that premium. We're looking for sites that require some development work and some repositioning in order to get them to the point where they're ready to go. By then, we hope to sort of dovetail into a much more robust market. But so on the distress side, I wouldn't say it's a focus, but we will certainly look. As it relates to the frequency of these distress situations, I think that, there have been over the past year in particular, certain situations. I think there's likely to probably be more over time. And I think the way we've always protected ourselves from those types of circumstances is by focusing on who we partner with in terms of the type of developer. And we've always talked to our investors about the importance of the financial capacity that these developers have, the relationships they have with their financial institutions, all Schedule I banks, their own balance sheet heft. And that is sort of what has enabled us to sort of endure more difficult conditions. So it's a combination of structure, it's a combination of the amount of leverage you're using, and then it's a combination of who your partners are and how they are positioned within the marketplace, and their ability to withstand difficult times and sort of troughs in the market. So I think what you're seeing in certain circumstances out there today is just an inability to either cope with the amount of debt on a property, and or issues with the sponsor and their inability to meet the covenants of the lender. Those are not issues for us in our portfolio, and it's times like this, where I think investors need to look at not only upside potential, but how are they protected on the downside, and that's something we've always focused on in good and bad markets. But I think today it comes to light given the conditions out there.
It's great. And, one of the things we often get asked about, we're going through a period in time where, as you said, on some of these sites, you have to be able to sit and wait and kind of see where things go. What are you and Greybrooke and our partners doing during times like this? Is there things that we can do to add value to the sites, or what are we able to do during these times where we're not able to go out and sell, or it's not advantageous to go out and sell?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I wish we could, kind of sit on a lawn chair and wait for the market to return. But in fact, we're probably busier than ever looking at creative ways to enhance value. To give you some examples, as the sort of sentiment has changed politically, where I think now people's perception of supply as being one of the core issues as to why we have a housing crisis is enabling us to kind of go back into sites and look at ways to potentially increase our density or increase our efficiencies while we wait for the market. So I think for us, that's one way to do it. We've had success kind of throughout different projects in our portfolio where we've been able to actually enhance the amount of buildable density that we have by going through committee of adjustments or other processes that aren't like full-blown reapplications. We're looking at ways to potentially become a little more innovative on the cost side, right? Different solutions, different technologies that we can put into place. Like we're looking, for example, at geothermal solutions in certain contexts, and other ways that we can sort of alleviate some of the costs. So I think we're all sort of, as an industry, and particularly as well us in our portfolio with our partners, waiting for a much better market to be able to release our inventory. And we're fortunate to be structured in a way where we can have that patience. But it doesn't mean that we're not spending a considerable amount of time on every project trying to figure out other ways to be efficient. And then when that market returns, you can either launch at a lower price potentially, or you could make even more profit than you anticipated by doing things to enhance value by other means.
It's great. And again, I mentioned it earlier, our clients, investors are continually being hit by a negative, news stream of what's happening in the condo market. Is there anything you can add to that we're seeing on the ground day to day that, kind of contradicts what that noise is out there? Obviously, a lot of it's, based in fact and statistics, but is there any context you can add to, what you are seeing on the ground that's different than what's being reported? Or is it really just, the context that we need to kind of wait through and see the market come back? Yeah,
I think I'd answer the question this way. Is today's market as anemic as, it's being reported? I would say it's slow. For sure. There's a difference between what we're seeing on the low-rise side, for example, and what we're seeing on the high-rise side. We're starting to see some velocity return and some success stories on the low-rise side, both pre-construction and resale, whereas the high-rise side is compromised at the moment. But what I would draw people's attention to is the fact that, and not to, speak poorly of sort of the media at times, but really it's headline grabbing. And, I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, I had to answer questions about, do you think that cities will exist again? And I thought they were preposterous, but there was tons of articles about how this is the end of the city. And sure enough, the cities come back stronger than ever. I had to answer questions about whether people will ever go back to work. And now, notwithstanding still a work from home component, the vast majority of firms have brought people back, including those tech companies that were kind of leading the charge when it came to work from home. And we're into some sort of hybrid situation. So I would say that the press tends to be a little more they exaggerate a little more. I tend to ignore it, right? Like we just look at the data, we look at the facts, we look at what's happening and what those drivers are, and I don't even read the articles. I mean, I read the articles to know what they're saying, but I largely ignore their conclusions because they're really reporting on a point in time and almost extrapolating it as being kind of the forever state. And I think, I've been at this 20 years and I've seen, markets, move from extremes up and down. And I've learned to kind of just focus on the data, focus on the fundamentals. And that's what we do here. We just focus on what's there and what we can control. And knowing that, again, the most important thing is we took a good hard look as to whether we have seen a fundamental shift in residential housing as a macro theme. And the conclusion to that was an unequivocal no. So if that's the case, then you don't really have to change too much about what you're doing. You just have to navigate through the scenarios. The office space, as an example, when COVID happened and sort of people started moving away from office space, we took a hard look at office and said, is there an opportunity here, or have we seen a fundamental change in the way that office is consumed? And I think that it's been more of a fundamental change. Right. So I think today you're seeing that manifest in the market where you're seeing kind of Class A office spaces full and vibrant, and then Class B and C are really, really struggling with high vacancy. And it's been a function of the change in how office is going to operate going forward. I don't think the same thing has happened in housing. I think we have the exact same problem and the exact same opportunity ahead of us to solve that housing affordability problem and that scarcity problem. So we just have to keep doing everything that we know how to do and that we've set ourselves up to do, a little more at times, a little less at times, because you have to navigate the points of volatility. But we're very confident in the thesis and going forward. Whether or not the media agrees with me is a whole other point. But the media is not Gray-Brook, and we focus on the things that are fact-based and data-based.
That's fantastic. I know we could spend hours discussing this topic, but I think this has been a good synopsis of what we're seeing on the ground, how we're feeling about the market, and appreciate your time.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you. For our viewers, if anyone wants to learn any more or has any questions on the market dynamics, feel free to reach out to your Gray Brook representative. And thank you for joining today's boardroom brief.